The heavy oak doors groaned, a sound that echoed against the vaulted ceiling. Chikondi stepped inside, the hinges protesting under his weight. He stopped just past the threshold, his boots clicking against the stone floor. He looked toward the third row on the left. That was where he had sat as a boy, knees pressed together, heart hammering against his ribs, waiting for a storm that never seemed to end. He walked forward now, his stride measured and deliberate. The air inside held the sharp, clean scent of polished wood and fresh lilies. He reached the row, rested a hand on the back of the pew, and felt the grain beneath his palm. It was just wood. The shadows that once loomed over these aisles were gone, replaced by the soft, filtered light pouring through the stained glass. He moved to the altar and stopped. He turned to face the empty rows, his posture upright, his breathing slow. He was no longer the boy who hid from the dark. He was the man who had walked through it to arrive here, at this altar, ready to begin. The side doors opened, and the low murmur of the congregation died away. Thandiwe stepped into the light. Chikondi watched her move down the aisle, his gaze locked onto hers. He saw the pride on the faces of his family. Every step she took seemed to shorten the distance between his old life and his new one. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to uncoil. The secrets he had carried for years, the shadows that had followed him, the relentless road of his own redemption, they all seemed to lose their grip. She reached the altar and stopped. The space between them vanished. He reached out, and she met his movement halfway. As their fingers interlaced, the last of his internal resistance gave way. The weight that had defined his existence for so long simply dissolved. He realized then that life was not measured by the depth of his falls, but by the strength of his choice to rise. The wedding was a promise kept. He held her hands tight, feeling the pulse beneath her skin, and for the first time in his life, he was entirely here, anchored in the present. The echoes of the ceremony faded, replaced by the rhythm of a shared life. The grand gestures of the wedding day settled into the background, leaving behind the quiet, unadorned work of existence. Days turned into a routine of shared coffee, quiet hallways, and the steady hum of a house finding its balance. One morning, the sun cut a sharp line across the bedroom floor, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Chikondi lay still, his head propped on one hand. He watched the steady rise and fall of the blanket over Thandiwe's chest. Her breathing was deep and rhythmic, a sound that anchored the room. There was no spectacle here, no audience to perform for, only the profound, fragile peace of two people sharing a space. He traced the line of her shoulder with his eyes, careful not to move. He understood then that this tranquility was not a permanent state. It was a garden, delicate and demanding, requiring constant tending. The quiet of the morning did not survive the week. It began with the mailbox, which bulged with envelopes that demanded immediate attention. Chikondi cleared the kitchen counter to make space, but the pile only shifted, growing wider and more chaotic. He moved to his study, where the desk had become a landscape of paper. Reports, invoices, and urgent memos formed jagged stacks that blocked his view of the window. He spent his hours sorting through the clutter, his fingers stained with ink, his movements mechanical and hurried. Every time he cleared one layer, another surfaced from beneath it, a cycle that felt increasingly difficult to break. The air in the room grew stale, thick with the scent of toner and dry paper. He reached for a pen, but his hand brushed against a stack of files, sending them sliding. The tranquility he had guarded so carefully in the bedroom was being pushed to the periphery, crowded out by the sheer volume of these external demands. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like an office that never closed. The office clock ticked past midnight, a rhythmic, hollow sound that echoed against the empty walls. Chikondi stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his eyes, blurring the lines of the spreadsheets. His shoulders were locked, a permanent ache radiating down his spine. He tried to type, but his fingers felt clumsy. He pushed the chair back, the metal legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood, but the room swayed. He walked out of the study, his movements heavy and uncoordinated, each step requiring a conscious effort. He reached the living room, the space dim and cool. He slumped onto the sofa, his body sinking like lead. His eyes closed, but his mind remained trapped in the cycle of deadlines. He was physically present, yet his thoughts were miles away. He sat there, a shadow of the man who had stood at the altar, staring into the darkness, unable to summon strength. The shadows in the living room seemed to deepen as Chikondi remained motionless on the sofa. He did not hear her approach until the floorboards groaned under a soft, deliberate step. Thandiwe stood in the doorway, a silhouette framed by the hallway light. She watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the gloom. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, cutting through the heavy air with precision. "You are always tired," she said. Chikondi blinked, his mind still racing through a mental checklist of uncompleted tasks. He looked up, his movements sluggish and defensive. "I am just trying to provide," he replied, the words coming out as a reflex. He expected her to nod, to accept the excuse. Instead, she stepped into the room, closing the distance until she stood directly before him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm and grounding. "I know," she said, "but do not disappear while trying." It hit him with the force of a physical blow, rattling the composure he had fought to maintain. The words echoed in the silence of the room, vibrating against the walls. Chikondi looked at his hands, then at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. A sudden, sharp memory surfaced, unbidden and cold. He saw himself, years ago, standing in a crowded room, feeling nothing. He remembered the specific sensation of pulling a mental curtain shut, of retreating into a hollow, unreachable space just to endure the day. He had mastered the art of being there without existing. Now, the realization hit him with the force of a physical impact. He was doing it again. He was building the same invisible wall, brick by brick, under the guise of providing. He felt a tremor in his chest, a desperate urge to stand up and walk away, to retreat into the familiar safety of his own isolation. His breath hitched as he recognized the pattern, the same numbness, the same detachment, the same slow erosion of his own humanity. He looked up, his eyes wide, the reality of his own behavior laid bare before him. He was not just tired, he was repeating a cycle that had once nearly destroyed him. The air in the room felt thin, and for a moment, he could not find his voice. The paralysis broke. Chikondi pushed himself up from the sofa, his movements no longer sluggish but deliberate. He did not look at the desk, nor did he think of the reports waiting in the dark. He looked only at Thandiwe. He stepped forward, the distance between them closing until he could see the steady pulse at her throat. He reached out, his fingers finding hers, and he gripped her hands tight. The contact was electric, a sudden tether to the present. He felt the warmth of her skin, the slight tension in her fingers, and the reality of her presence flooded his senses. He realized then that the work was secondary, a shadow compared to the gravity of this connection. He did not speak. Words felt insufficient for the shift occurring within him. Instead, he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in a firm, grounding embrace. He pressed his forehead against her shoulder, exhaling the long-held tension of the day. The cycle of running had finally stopped. He held her until the frantic rhythm of his own pulse slowed to match hers. The room was still, save for the soft intake of breath between them. Chikondi pulled back just enough to look at her, his grip on her hands remaining firm. He saw the quiet patience in her eyes, a mirror to the peace he had nearly traded away. He turned his head, glancing toward the desk where the reports lay in a jagged stack. The sight no longer carried the weight of a command. It was just paper, ink, and time that did not belong to him. He walked over to the desk, gathered the documents, and placed them inside a drawer, shutting it with a decisive click. The sound echoed, final and sharp. He returned to the center of the room, leaving the work behind. The world outside would continue to demand, to pull, and to a road, but he had drawn a line in the air. He would not let the relentless pace of the days steal his heart again. He moved back to Thandiwe, his movements fluid and unhurried. He took her hand, leading her away from the doorway and into the heart of their home. The evening air felt different now, stripped of the urgency that had clouded his vision for so long. He understood that tranquility was not a destination to reach, but a garden to tend with every passing hour. He chose her. He chose this moment. He chose to be present, fully and without reservation, starting now and continuing through every tomorrow they would share together.